I'm excited to talk about how we can reframe stress responses and empower our wellness choices. So when I talk about reframing stress, there's been this assumption that stress can be negative, just a general assumption. But I'm going to tell you that stress doesn't have to be negative. It's perfectly normal, and it's the way we look at stress that can really be positive or negative in our lives. So let's think about stress as an exercise. When we exercise or we work out, we actually break down our muscles to build back stronger. So there's always going to be a varying degree of stress in our lives, but it's if we are building back, if we are getting stronger, if we are using it for positive outcomes, that it doesn't have to take a negative toll on us. So when we think about stress, think about it as being a building opportunity. We actually have the ability to calm our bodies down and begin to regroup, begin to reassess, and begin to make conscious choices of how we want to move forward. So let's talk about fight. That is a stress response we're all pretty familiar with. And I like to associate it with a fire. So when we get stressed, when our feathers get ruffled, when we're in conflict, we feel, or at least I feel, a little bit of a burn, right? I kind of feel that fire welling up inside me. I might be feeling angry, frustrated, any of those things that come along with, the stress, that stress response. And when we feel that little burn, it's a conscious choice. It's like that alarm going off. And we actually have an alarm in our brains, and it's the amygdala part of our brain that is that stress response alarm. So it lets us know we might be in danger. And when we know that's what's going on, then we can be really aware of what we do next. Now, this was built into us for survival. That's a beautiful thing that we have survived for all of these years and centuries because we have this innate stress response. We have this little alarm going off in our brains, and it signals into our bodies that we may need to run, we might need to fight, we might need to freeze, whatever that is. It's that all of those stress responses. But now, whenever we're in traffic or whenever we are offended by a coworker, that same alarm goes off. So we have the opportunity to be more conscious and be more aware that when we have the urge to fight, that is actually a really natural response, but then we have the choice of how to move forward. And let me explain it this way. When we feel that little burn, when we feel that little fire inside of us, it can be an opportunity to, again, know that that's what's happening, that alarm is going off. But if we pause for a moment and really assess the situation, say again, it is a coworker that might say something that you just don't like. Well, you're not getting chased by a saber-toothed tiger, right? You're not about to be eaten by a bear. So it might be helpful to take a pause and really notice if you need to fight. And what happens if we keep going with that burning process? What happens with fire? What happens when we feed fire? It keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it begins to burn everybody and everything around us as well. So I think it's a really great question to ask ourselves, first of all, when we're in that stress response, when we're in that burn mode, how we can begin to cool down our flames, and also what feeds those flames. So for me, the anger, the entitlement, the pride, the assumption that that person did something to hurt me, those are all perceptions and perspectives that are going to keep making my fire bigger. Now, one thing to really note is that those perceptions and perspectives aren't necessarily true. It's what I'm building up. It's what I'm fueling my fire with. But it doesn't mean my coworker actually meant to hurt me. It doesn't mean my coworker is actually even a real threat to me. But if I continue to fuel that fire, that fire will get so big that I will ultimately begin to burn other people, right? So I might tear down my coworker. I might retaliate with a mean comment because I felt so angry and that fire just got so big. I might walk over to my desk and somebody next to me, I huff and I'm in a bad mood, and they feel that fire and it brings them down too. I might go home later that day and I might get really huffy with my child and they feel that fire. So understand that when we allow that fight, when we allow that stress response to get out of control like a huge forest fire, it can ultimately have that burning effect. And what happens is it burns us first. We're the first to burn down. So it's a great question to ask ourselves. Are we somebody who wants to burn ourselves and burn other people? Or do we want to build? Do we want to build up? And if you say yes to building up, there's a lot of possibilities and potential when we're looking at these stress responses and then also making the wellness choices from there. So the next stress response is withdrawing. So I like to think about that if we're talking about the elements, if we're going from fire, I go to wind. And just a heavy wind coming through. If you're out, if you're done, then you're withdrawing. Now, withdrawing often gets a bad rap, but to be honest, if you are in a toxic situation, if you're in a violent situation, then withdrawing can be your best option. So if you are truly in danger and it's not a safe situation for you, to get out of there can be a pretty great solution. The opposite of withdrawing in perhaps a potentially healthy situation is when you're having healthy dialogue, maybe with a partner, with a coworker, or even with a child, and you're feeling uncomfortable and you want to escape. So you have to assess when withdrawing is going to be beneficial for you, and notice when that comes up for you. Notice when that alarm goes off. Again, I like to say you're going to feel that little burn, whether you're offended, whether you're in conflict, whether you're in traffic, whatever that is. And just notice your tendency if you want to escape or bail or blow through it. Okay? So as we are bringing these situations and scenarios into our awareness, into consciousness, then we get to make those choices. Now, the third one is yielding. So that is where, and this is in our conflict resolution world, yielding or freezing in our stress response world. I like to think of it as ice. You turn into ice. Now, when we yield, we actually give over our power to somebody else. And we say, whatever you want to do, whatever your interests are, I'm going to put myself on the back burner, and you will go ahead and move forward with what you want to do. That's yielding. Now, I think of it in the same way as freezing, because think about if a deer freezes and a bear is heading towards it. That deer ultimately fully surrenders all its power to that bear. That bear can do anything at that point with that deer. So I think of that also like ice. If we turn into ice, if we just freeze, somebody can dump a warm boiling pot of water, we'll melt. Somebody can take a hammer to us, we'll crack. So we are not taking control of what we want to do. We're not making a move, we're just freezing. And again, this can be a natural stress response. If we are in danger, this is just something that happens. So we're not saying that any of this is good, bad, right, or wrong. We're just wanting to bring this to awareness, and then so you can move forward with empowered choices. Now, also, I want to make a point that often our bodies and our minds just react. Those stress responses just happen. So I want to preface this that we're not going to be perfect in sometimes the way that we want to move forward or the way we want to act in the moment. So take perfection off the table and bring in the word awareness and consciousness. So when we have these stress responses, when we feel that burn, notice what your go-to responses are. Do we tend to fight? Do we tend to yield and give up our interest for somebody else's? Or do we tend to just want to withdraw and blow through and get away from the situation as fast as possible? And sometimes we can use those different responses in different settings. So we may use a response in our work setting that might be different than our home setting. So just be aware and cognizant of what you might use and what generally is your go-to stress response. Now, we haven't covered the fourth one, which is our relaxation response or our problem solving. So our relaxation response, again, we have innately built in us, and it's bringing us back into center. When we are able to breathe deeply and pause in conflict, that is giving us the ability to bring our prefrontal cortex, our Broca, our language centers, our problem-solving ability back online, back into the here and now. And it is that simple, but it can be hard if we're not aware and we're not cognizant. And sometimes when we're in fight mode and we're losing control, I have felt for myself, I don't want to do anything different. So it's beginning to practice doing something different. And I will say breathing deep into the belly is different than breathing shallow into the chest. So when we only breathe shallow into the chest and we have those short breaths, that's our panic mode. And if you felt that, it doesn't feel very good. It doesn't feel like you can get a lot of air. But when we begin to breathe deep into the belly, we are actually moving that breath down into our bodies, and it gives our bodies and our minds a signal, and it says we are safe, we are out of harm. It brings that prefrontal cortex back online. It brings our Broca back online. It gives us those language skills. It gives us the problem-solving skills. And it might take a moment. So we might need to pause. Again, if that coworker says something, if we're in traffic, whatever that might be, whatever's stressing us out, whether that's our child spills something all over the floor, whether our spouse, makes us angry over something. It might take a pause and the commitment to just taking a few deep breaths. And that's something I always like to do, is guide people through those breaths. So inhaling in through the nose and even counting. So maybe inhaling for 3 to 4 counts. Take a pause, and then exhale for 4 to 5 counts. And when you breathe, you want to feel your belly expand with air, almost like a balloon is blowing up with air. And then as you exhale, you want to feel that belly slowly deflate, like a balloon is letting go of all of the air. And that, as simple as it is, can be so impactful. And that is the here and now and the place that brings you the empowerment and the ability to choose where you go next. It means you will be centered and focused on what you might want to say next, what kind of tone of voice you might want to have, what choice you might want to make, whether that is to withdraw, whether it is to stand your ground and be firm, or whether it's to problem solve and to talk things out. So as we are bringing all this to consciousness, we understand that our stress responses, if they get the best of us, that can take a huge toll on our bodies. That can take a huge toll on our wellness and our health. So it's really up to us to understand how our bodies and our minds work together. And I encourage you to look further into these stress responses. Once again, there's so much research, there's so much knowledge that we have on how our mind and our body work together. Going back to that burning analogy, if you're constantly burning in here, if you're burning yourself down, you might have the tendency to burn those around you. So today, I just challenge you, make the choice to be aware and make the choice to be cognizant of what is happening in your mind and body. And then also doing some small steps. So it doesn't mean we have to do this huge overhaul of our lives. The small steps can be the most profound and impactful. When we just turn just a tad, we don't have to do a full 180, but when we do just a small turn, it sends us into an entire different direction. So a small turn you could do today is just being aware and noticing and starting to do what I like to call an audit or an assessment of where your brain and body are working together in these situations. And then from there, you get to choose.